On December 7th, 2023, I uploaded a video reviewing the 1979 live-action adaptation of The Rose of Versailles, this being the film Lady Oscar. This film strictly following the life of Oscar de Jauge, as opposed to the dual perspective of Marie Antoinette and Oscar de Jauge, as per the manga. I initially watched this film with no clue as to the canon of The Rose of Versailles and watched it with Mia, an at the time expert on the series as compared to myself. Her and myself had very differing opinions on the film, as she, with the knowledge of the manga, found herself frustrated, confused, and irate as to why the movie was so different to the manga. Where I found myself enjoying the fact that Oscar kissed a singular woman in the movie. Well, 8 or 9 months later, I'm back. I've read the source material, and I'm equally as irate as it wasn't one woman that Oscar de Jauge kissed and or romanced. It was multiple. I feel robbed. Today, we will be re-reviewing the Lady Oscar film and going into detail as to why it's not the best adaptation, especially of the Rose of Versailles series. Now, before we begin, I have tried to keep this as review-like as possible, as my goal for this video wasn't to make it a comparative, and one of the points I try to go into, I want to make its own proper video essay, but I have a lot to say on this subject as Mia dragged me into this fandom kicking and screaming. And I shall make an amends to my initial review. I think this is the second time I've ever done this on this channel. And this review absolutely rips through not only the movie but the manga as well, so major spoilers for both. I would highly recommend that you go read The Rose of Versailles before watching the movie and this review as to why it's not the best.
If this is a joke, I hardly find it humorous.
It isn't a joke.
With the story of Lady Oscar relying on Oscar's life story, I felt it was necessary to analyse the characters and their roles in this story, as there are some massive changes in character dynamics from the manga to this live action film. Contextually, the relevant plot from this movie is that of volume 3 of the deluxe hardcover edition, mostly, with the rising tensions of the revolution. But we do have hints of volumes 1 and 2, the birth of Oscar herself, and mentions of Marie Antoinette and her story being told to a pubescent Oscar. Now, saying this as this story, as I said, centers Oscar, I will ignore the rushed introduction of Marie Antoinette because, well, she's not entirely relevant to this film. We're then thrust into Oscar's adult self, despite some events occurring when the character is much younger, specifically interactions between characters such as them first meeting, which makes plot points very, very messy. Like the whole event that occurs with the Countess Polniak and Rosalie, or the meeting between Fersen and Oscar, this being one of Oscar's first loves. The main contention of this film is the Great Diamond Necklace event and the court coming together, the parliament doors being nailed shut, leading to the storming of the Bastilles, and the eventual death of Andre and the disappearance of Oscar. Now, with the characters having seemingly been aged up, we do miss a lot of context to our Marie Antoinette and Oscar dynamic. However, to jam the much needed context into the story, there is an astounding amount of tell don't show, as pointed out by YouTuber Manatee. As I watched their videos, I would highly recommend going watching their review of this as well. But a key perpetrator of this tell don't show would be Nanny, this being Andre's grandmother and Oscar's nanny. As despite her being a side character, she kind of acts as a mouthpiece for a lot of the major plot points for this story, telling us key parts of the plot that we are missing. The sad part of this is, in the context of this being from Oscar's perspective, There is ways that, like, the way Nanny talks about Marie Antoinette and her life, the filmmakers could have actually shown shots of a younger Marie Antoinette just interacting with the people around her. Doesn't even have to be, like, connected, all that sort of stuff. Instead, we get a lot of shots of young Oscar just sort of nodding her head and listening. But no, anything that isn't outright spoken into existence by characters is acted out at the wrong point of the series, mostly happening towards the start of the film. There is some film devices with, like, the children singing Marie Antoinette's wrongdoings to communicate with the audience, and the, like, public perception of her, but it is fickle and very easily missable as it sort of fades into the Foley and natural background of scenes. To really delve into why this movie fails the manga so badly, I'll be going into analysing the characters themselves, and it's probably the best way I can go about explaining why this movie is so bad. To begin this, we'll be analysing one of the most important, lesser important characters, Jeanne. Now, despite me not knowing how to pronounce Jeanne's name, Jeanne is probably the most manga accurate character to the film.
It looks better on me than it does on that bitch.
And that's because she is a self-serving narcissist who just wants to live a life of luxury and feels entitled to it because she's born from the line of the House of Valois.
Oh, I want things. I want a lot of things. And I don't know why I can't have them.
Illegitimately, like Rosalie. However, much like every other character, that little factoid I just mentioned is said once as a once-off line when Jeanne is running away and is never explored in the actual plot itself. Meaning to first-time viewers like myself, upon first viewing, she could be lying out of her fucking ass because she lies out of her ass for the rest of the movie. In that way, the lack of information about her works, and she becomes one of the more, or at least what feels like, one of the more developed characters, because you know her motives, pure greed, and sure, at some points it feels like, why are we following this character? But it also tends to feel like that in the manga itself, so let it slide. Other than the bloodline of Valois line not being established, which does actually affect Rosalie and Countess Pognac's characters, the way Jeanne's character is last seen is a little bit different in the manga compared to the movie. In the book, her involvement in slandering the Queen with the affair of the diamond necklace extends into a trial where she is then branded, where Jeanne is then branded, which is where we cut off in the movie. What we don't get is the roaring support of Jeanne from the public due to Jeanne lying out of her ass about Marie Antoinette. She's tossed out quite easily as a character, and her death in the film is as a result of the branding, as it is assumed. We also just straight up don't get the trial of Jeanne lying, as we are then sort of just smash cut into Oscar's issues with being married off before storming the Bastilles. We miss a huge, massive period of time between Jeanne's death and the storming of the Bastille. Not only is Jeanne's actual death in her home next to Nicholas, but we miss a whole segment with the guards. We miss Oscar being offended at being called a lesbian, which is the funniest part of the entire fucking series to me. And most importantly, we miss the anger of the people. A big part of the latter half of The Rose of Versailles is the people. You can't make a Rose of Versailles movie and not include the people and not mention the fucking people, and Jeanne was a big catalyst to that. And despite Jeanne's majority of plot being fleshed out in this film, a big part is still missing, probably some of the more important parts being missing. Speaking of missing people, the guards. They don't make sense in the film. While mostly insignificant to the film, the guards are actually quite important to Oscar and Oscar's story. Initially, she starts leading the guards as a way to distance herself from the Queen and, to a degree, Fersen. Oscar and Andre being in the guards leads to their deaths, as this is where Oscar starts to truly sympathise for the people of Paris. Sure, Rosalie is like a foot in the door to Oscar's perception of Paris as an aristocrat. The guards kick down said door and truly make Oscar a rebel. She fights with her people for her people, and there is a mutual respect for the guards and Oscar by the storming of the Bastilles. If not some inappropriate behaviours of a guard trying to assault Oscar and also fucking with Andre in the process. Even when Andre goes blind, the men insist that he does not go into battle because they care about him and Oscar. But understand, he is Oscar's shadow, and even if it means death, he will stay with Oscar. It is all about respect and empathy between people regardless of class. I'd also argue that it contributes to Oscar claiming that she has a woman's heart, as her being so protective over the guards when they go against orders of higher-ups and are then sentenced to execution is, in my eyes, a parallel to Marie Antoinette standing up against a murderous crowd and throwing her own pride to the side to protect her and her children and the people who surround her. However, in the film, the guards' roles are completely different. I'll expand upon this when talking about Oscar and Andre, as the guards are quintessential to their story, but the Rose of Versailles manga is a feminist piece. I would definitely argue a queer piece as well, but seeing the landscape of manga and politics at the time of publication, it is 100% a feminist piece. The movie tries to emulate that, but fails desperately. Oscar in this film is grappling with her gender roles as perceived by society as a woman versus what she was thrust into by the gender roles picked out for her by her father. This too is the case in the manga. However, the execution is wildly off, as while her father refers to her as he, him, until it benefits him that he has another daughter, and we're told she believes she was a boy until a certain age, and she is given the role of Lord and Protector of Marie Antoinette. I don't believe for 1 second that Lady Oscar struggles with anything other than being perceived as a romantic interest and girl-bossing her way through life. Now, as you may notice, audio quality has changed, and I am no longer on screen. My recording got interrupted by a phone call that I didn't realize happened until after I finished the recording, and my mic was not turned on. So for the rest of this video, it will just be my audio overlapped with some visuals. So, continuing on, Oscar de Jarge of Lady Oscar demands respect despite being a woman. As the role was given to her, she expects respect from it. These titles of Lord and Protector are just that, titles. And so the role of the guards in all this, to further that narrative. Oscar is frustrated when the guards do not have their swords and are berating her with sexist comments. She believes it as an act of defiance against her until being told directly otherwise by Andre. And then she suddenly just feels helpless. Then, instead of exploring her with the guards more, the next we see the guards is when they have to disperse a crowd, and all of them, including Oscar, do not do that. To which they are then jailed and for some reason suddenly have respect for Oscar. In the manga, there was so much more involving the guards. Oscar finds out about the rivals being missing herself, exploring why her men are underweight, trying to find ways to help them. She's easy on them, earning their respect. Lady Oscar is a girl boss who gets what she wants and whose agency is directly linked to Andre. Lord Oscar is a strong female character who is fighting an inner battle of gender and love while also having to grapple with the outer conflict of the revolution. The guards should be the key to that, and yet they're simply a pawn to build upon Oscar's feminist image, which doesn't even work because Andre's the one who does it all. But we'll get to Andre later. Right now, I have to turn back to the women of Rose of Versailles and another important character, the Countess de Polignac.
I hate only one. The bitch who killed my mother.
First of all, she is instantly referred to as Gabrielle by Marie Antoinette, which just dismantles the reveal that she is Rosalie's biological mother. Not that that means anything, since that plot point isn't even in the film. She isn't relevant to Oscar directly as a character, so it is understandable that she's not a present character to the film, but she is an important character to Marie Antoinette and how the Great Diamond Necklace event occurs. Much like a majority of the contentions in the manga, when translated to film, Countess de Polignac is present, but her threat is never relevant, only in talk, downplaying the weight of her manipulation on Marie Antoinette, which to a certain extent mischaracterizes the two of them, as well as negating Countess de Polignac's importance to the story and how the people come to dislike her, as well as Marie Antoinette outside of Rosalie, who tries to assault her.
You killed my mother!
Marie Antoinette and Countess de Polignac are as gay as geese in this as well. Take that as you will. We're never exposed to Countess de Polignac the way she is supposed to be, which is manipulating a young queen to benefit herself, which leads to the public becoming increasingly more frustrated with the queen and an ever-worsening debt to France, marching the country closer to the idea of revolution. In this film, she also appears to be the same age as Marie Antoinette, which also lowers the blow of the queen being misguided by an older woman insanely. Then to whatever the fuck Rosalie is on. I know I've spoken on Rosalie's role in the story being a bit of a nothing burger. When I mean that in terms of her own character growth, because she goes from a pretty bold commoner to finding out she's actually born of noble blood, and then sort of just being a crybaby and noble sympathiser, when Rosalie at the start of the story was quite the opposite. Her growth stagnates quite quickly, and so her role as a character is tossed quite quickly. The point of her character is that Oscar is sympathetic to her and her scenario, Rosalie being the beginning of Oscar seeing how the people of Paris and of France are being treated, France's reality, which then over time is further explored by the guard and the living situation of their families. And Rosalie is actually somewhat relevant to the diamond necklace incident, as her being Jean's sister knows Jean, and to a degree causes Jean to panic when she is seen by Rosalie. Rosalie could easily damage Jean's reputation. Her character is important to minor plot points, but she herself doesn't have too much growth or relevance after both Jean and Charlotte's death. Sure, she marries Bernard. Sure, she sympathises with Marie Antoinette in her dying days, but she doesn't do anything in particular after she is married to Bernard. But even then, in the first half of the story, she's somewhat important to the growth or downfalls of other characters. Not really herself. A nothing burger in her own growth, and that's it. Rosalie in the film is actually a nothing burger, legitimately a useless character, when she should really be quite important, especially with how the end is executed. Not only in the end of the film do we see Rosalie and Bernard celebrating the taking of the Bastille as if she truly knows Oscar, but Oscar and Rosalie interact once in the entire film, and that is when she tries to whore herself out to Oscar. Other than that, she is utterly useless and nameless to boot. I only ever heard her name be uttered by other people and never properly connected to her physically until the last scene at the Bastilles. Rosalie is key to Oscar understanding the plights that the people go through. Without Rosalie, we have no Oscar willing to die for her people. And guess what? She doesn't! Rosalie is severely detached from the plot as a character. Sure, her storyline as a peasant is told.
Her sister runs off to be a noble, and her mother gets run over by the Countess de Polignac. Where the plot diverges is that Rosalie does not get taken in by Oscar, because they never meet on screen again until the end of the movie. So instead of running into the Countess Polignac and causing her downfall by refusing to be her replacement for Charlotte, who doesn't appear in the movie, Rosalie just tries to fucking kill the Countess de Polignac in a pathetic attempt that just leaves her wailing.
You killed my mother!
Rosalie is far more aggressive and reckless in this film, on par with her character pre-Stay with Oscar, and in concept that sounds a lot more interesting to Rosalie's character. But in trying to keep to the status quo of the manga, it falls so far flat. On top of that, Rosalie and Bernard dating pre-Polignac? Really? Speaking of Bernard, Robespierre, King Louis, and Fersen. They're just Ken. With the exception of Fersen, they don't have a purpose in the story but are named figures because they are either relevant to the manga or to French history. It is these people who are talked about but never built upon truly. They're so insignificant to the plot that I am just putting them all together. Now, Bernard and Robespierre are irrelevant to a different reason to King Louis, who are irrelevant to a different reason than Fersen. But it's all to the same degree. Bernard and Robespierre suffer the exact same fate of Tell Don't Show. For the first half of the film, Bernard is referenced in name and name alone, with no face. So when he does actually appear, we have absolutely no clue who this guy is. The name and person come together once Oscar calls out to Bernard and Rosalie again at the end of the film. Despite being referred to so often from Rosalie, Andre, and Oscar, his actions are minimal and can be replaced with any other revolutionary. Unlike the manga, where he poses a possible threat to Oscar, pushes the plotline of Andre going blind, and introduces Oscar to notable names in the revolution. Robespierre is a much smaller role in the manga, but a relevant historical figure. He appears multiple times in the manga and is a central character to the Third House of Representatives. In this movie, he is simply talked about before a bar fight where Oscar says she was moved by his speech when the king was inducted. Of what relevance does this give the movie? I have no clue. King Louis is so different from his manga counterpart. First of all, his role is the king in this film, and king alone. He's as relevant as a set dressing. He is present, but he is just unneeded. Manga Louis is more or less relevant, but he has purpose, as his decisions actually affect all of France, and you feel there is weight to him being king. Much like Robespierre, in the trial of Jean and at the meeting of the House of Representatives, he has a duty. But with that taken out, he's just there. He's also an ass in this, just tiny little asshole baby man who likes to play with his locks. Because yes, the locksmith thing was brought into the film as a one-off line that has nothing to do with characterizing him, unlike in the manga. In the manga, he's timid, well-mannered, and wishes to avoid conflict as much as possible. He's a likable coward who is really pulled along by everyone else, where all he wants to do is sit in his happy place and make locks. He has to step up to be king, even if he takes the wrong step. Whereas King Louis in the film is just an asshole to everyone.
She? Oscar is a lady?
So, Fersen. In the context of the story, Fersen is a very important character to Marie Antoinette's story. Not so much Oscar's, so his inclusion is a little bit weird, and leads to some mischaracterization of Marie Antoinette as well as himself. Sure, Fersen is one of Oscar's loves, but he is one of the reasons Marie Antoinette falls into unpopularity with the public. I also said that he's pretty unspectacular as a character for the story, and still do not understand why he, out of all other side characters, is highlighted as being as important as Marie Antoinette and Oscar. Because of the story of the film takes place as the characters are already adults, Fersen's relevance is weird. By the time he and Oscar meet, he's finding Oscar attractive while he's off fucking Marie Antoinette, which I will mention in Marie Antoinette's section. Fersen appears and disappears like a ghost, essentially. All we know of him is that both Oscar and Marie Antoinette like him, which is then flipped on its head after the ball where Oscar dresses as a woman and Andre essentially forces himself on her, which happens around the middle of the film and, with exception of being dramatic, I feel wasn't actually needed. Fersen's presence is fleeting, especially with his relevance to Oscar's feelings. Sure, he's important to the story of Marie Antoinette, but this movie is Lady Oscar, about Oscar, and Fersen just isn't important to her. Sure, he's her first love, and that's it. And it's hard to antiquate when your characters are already adults. In theory, he's important and has relevance, just not to Oscar.
I asked you to give me an honest opinion, Oscar, not a dishonest one. From now on, I forbid you to express opinions that are not truthful.
Now I get to talk about this bitch, Marie Antoinette, the other protagonist of The Rose of Versailles, who is simply shunted off to the side in this film. Pure context, just before I get into all of it, I say a lot that she is a brat and she is mischaracterized. There is a reason for this, and that is because this is a French film. I don't know if you know the history of French people and Marie Antoinette and just French people and monarchy in general, because you should, because this is The Rose of Versailles. But the French people don't particularly like Marie Antoinette, so it makes sense that this character is mischaracterized in a French film, as I don't think French people want to paint Marie Antoinette in a very sympathetic light, which is, to an extent, what The Rose of Versailles does. It would also be the reason this is called Lady Oscar instead of The Rose of Versailles, because The Rose of Versailles can actually be interpreted as either Oscar or Marie Antoinette. With all that out of the way, I can now note that when I was writing notes about Marie Antoinette, I continuously called her a brat and not the cunty kind. She was just kind of being a cunt. And that felt off, as the Marie Antoinette of the manga is generally kind, misguided, and then becomes a bitch for a bit. Of note, who we can in the end still sympathize for, because for a big part of the series she doesn't know the state of Paris, of the people, and when she realizes, it's a little too late. Yes, she develops a complex because she is and always will be royalty, but in the end you can sympathize for her. Marie Antoinette of the film does not have this quality. She is an entitled brat the entire film and is also clueless to the people's struggles and is unaware of her forthcoming demise, as she has a blind faith in the people who hate her.
I've done them no wrong. I am their queen.
And in all of that, she is wrapped in Fersen's arms, which fucks me off even more, because Marie Antoinette is mischaracterized pretty heavily in this film. Now, in part, that would be because the movie is not about her, it's about Oscar. But even then, she's not done justice. She's played as this blasé aristocrat who's done nothing but be a brat and could care less initially about what people think about her, when that is not Marie Antoinette of The Rose of Versailles. Now, this will be with reference to her relationship with Fersen, because this is one major difference between movie and manga Marie Antoinette. In the movie, Marie Antoinette is obviously in a relationship with Fersen, and they do have a very risque scene where it's not evident if they're making out or about to do the do. When alerted that people are aware of her affair with Fersen, Marie Antoinette brushes it off, is careless, and says she's in love with Fersen, and openly admitting it in a semi-public area.
You're going to look at me with those solemn eyes and tell me that news of my love affair is common knowledge now.
Manga Marie Antoinette would not be caught dead doing that. Not only was Manga Marie and Fersen's relationship a tightly sealed secret, with them going as far to meet in the bushes, not a lavish gazebo, but it was also very ambiguous as to what they were doing. On top of that, Marie Antoinette hated her relationship being outed and fervently denied it, especially when people accused her child of being Fersen's. She outright claimed that they'd never had sex. That happening near her capture by the people. She once or twice confided her feelings in Oscar, but other than that, kept her relationship and secrets very close to her chest, which is so very opposite to the movie. Then, after her own mischaracterization, her downgrade as such an important character changes the relevance of characters around her and their context to Oscar as well. The most minor example I can think of is Marie Antoinette's own son. Yes, that is a pun, or should I say children. At any given time, only 2 of 3 appear. And the thing with Marie Antoinette's son is that while not the most necessary character to Oscar's story, his death is important. In the film, it is off screen. Oscar interacts with him maybe once or twice, and he's a very cryptic presence in the film, born to die. His funeral does nothing to show any character from Marie Antoinette as well, which it does in the book, because she is absolutely shattered that her first son dies, and that they are too poor to give him a proper funeral. Oscar is also upset that he died, but at this point she is separating herself from the royal family. Of course, I already mentioned Countess de Polignac not being a threat due to the Queen already appearing to be a brat in her own right who doesn't need too much persuading, not to mention the whole arc where Marie Antoinette goes against the Countess de Polignac doesn't happen. Shaw alluded to the fact that the Queen is recklessly spending, but not outright discussed. And of course is her relationship to and with Oscar. It is so stiff in this film, and I don't mean it in the way that Oscar talks to Marie Antoinette, as at that point in the story, Oscar is starting to shift away from the crown. And sure, from Oscar's perspective, it is stiffer than the manga, where Oscar overnight sort of does a 180 and the move to the guards feels more about her pride than her respect of the people of Paris. But in general, the way Marie Antoinette talks to Oscar is weird. Marie Antoinette talks to Oscar like she is a soldier, not a human, and gets frustrated with her quite easily. Very listen to all my issues, my subject, as if the talks with Marie Antoinette are purposely trying to paint her in this bratty way to us as an audience. So when Oscar quits, it's more understandable, which makes it a little awkward when Oscar asks to be moved to the guards and Marie Antoinette just objects in frustration as,
You protect me, do you not? How much more useful can a person be?
Whereas manga Marie Antoinette, while still frustrated, is more confused and saddened that she feels like she's losing a friend, and only grants it because Oscar convinces her. It's a confrontation, but less confrontational. Which leads me to the main dish of the difference between the manga and the movie. Oscar and Andre. As it should most likely be, Oscar and Andre's segment will be a bit blended together, but I will try to separate it as much as possible, starting with Oscar. Oscar's portrayal in the film is an attempt at feminism that fails so wholeheartedly, it is embarrassing. Now, you can argue all you want on the purpose of the original story, whether it's queer or feminist, everyone's perception of text varies, and while the intention of the author is always present, more than one interpretation of a text can exist, and it's up to the reader to interpret and derive that meaning. So, as Judith Butler says, gender is performative, and there is no better example of this performance than Oscar's struggle with gender in the text and how her titles all clash. In the manga, Oscar is well aware that she is a woman. She does struggle to be seen as a love interest by Fersen, thinking maybe that femininity will help her. She only comes to blows with her sex and how that causes her to feel for the people of France. That is what the story is insinuating. Obviously, anyone can be empathetic, versus the gender roles that she has to live up to. Essentially, the gender she was assigned was male, with male roles and male expectations, despite everyone understanding that she was born a woman, in a woman's body, and despite the fact that Oscar doesn't necessarily hate that she is a woman, she's just generally more confident in her abilities overall when presenting more masculine. She's given a man's name, referred to as Lord Oscar, and all of this has the added layering of militaristic expectations. She's not only brought up as a boy, but a boy as a part of a military family. She has different expectations on how she should be treated. So when she's engaged for her safety and has borderline maternal feelings for her soldiers, she struggles. In her final days, she comes to blows that she is in essence a woman, but refuses to let that stop her doing from what she has been raised to do, and fulfill her duty as well as her own personal duty to her soldiers and to her people, despite the protests of all of her loved ones. Oscar's struggles are based on those around her trying to change the expectations that she has been trained to live up to. She's generally quite cocky and, despite being a woman, is confident in her abilities, which gives her the upper hand in conflicts, which is how the guards come to respect her, her wit. Andre's shadowing of Oscar gives her the added strength to go on and be cocky as well, which is seen wavering when she is physically overpowered by some men, but is not always true to her character, and only really affects her when Andre starts to go blind, without her realizing. But that is the manga. Earlier, I mentioned that in the film, Oscar behaves like she doesn't know she was a woman. And at the same time, Oscar expects to be respected despite being a woman, forcing her way through the story without showing that she earned the respect she garnered. A bit like a Mary Sue, Oscar's struggle only appears at the hand of men, and her want to be pursued as a womanly figure in the eyes of the ones she loves, while still appearing as this strong, authoritative figure. The military and revolution stuff is all handled by Andre after all.
I broke my engagement today.
Then you're learning. You've already taken the first step. Now, will you have the courage to break the ties with your past? Will you come with me, Oscar?
No, not now. I can't. No, I can't. I can't.
So Oscar closed her eyes and ears and continued to do her duty.
So she just needs to be the leader and get all the accolades, completely unlike her manga counterpart. It's a frustratingly bland depiction of the character, and it fails as feminism when, rather than Andre supporting Oscar and practically being the psychic love interest, Oscar depends on Andre for everything. Andre is a fucking dick in this. He's the most out of character in this movie, and now I think this was done to give Oscar a strong male love interest, as I just said with Oscar, she fails to be a strong female character that the movie was trying to paint her out to be, because her agency and her value as a character relies heavily on Andre.
Through my death, my life would have great meaning.
Now, I will concede, I get where this element of the Andre-Oscar ship could have gotten confused, as in their final days, Oscar reveals that without Andre, she is nothing. And to a degree, it is about her physical strength, as she is harassed by one of the guards and physically overpowered. Trust me, manga Oscar gets forced upon by so many people. What Oscar means is that without Andre, Oscar has no confidence in herself. She is not Oscar without Andre, and Andre is not himself without Oscar. He is literally referred to as her shadow. He is a part of her as her own soul. And that's why they die together. As without Andre, Oscar has no meaning. He goes to the length of going blind but remaining loyal to her side, as they are nothing without each other, something that is highly respected by the guards, and they make sure to help him see when he is blind, despite the fact that it is all for naught. Movie Andre is a self-centered, self-serving prick. It's like the movie makers saw the obsessed Andre in the beginning of the story of him confessing his love for Oscar, you know, when he forces himself upon her, and went, that's our man, that's our Andre, that's his entire character. And not only is he self-centered, he's a condescending shit as well. Obviously, we're going to start with the entire point of Andre's character to emphasize and define this: his love and obsession with Oscar. Very early on, we see Andre look over Oscar as she is sleeping. Now, this does happen in the manga, but it is much more subtle and in a less stalkerish way, and is more emphasized when Andre is going blind, so he can remember every single part of her face. Second is his dynamic with Oscar's potential suitors and other love interests. My only benefit to Andre is that his reaction to finding out that Fersen is back in France is pretty accurate and a little bit camp.
The dress is late because the Queen's lover is back.
What did you say?
But the dress thing happening a lot earlier in the movie than in the manga, as well as everything, is a key point to Andre's character deviating heavily from the manga in multiple ways. Number one is the assaults, because that is what it is. Very different. In the manga, Oscar is not in her dress when this happens. Andre does it when Oscar is getting ready for bed, and he is far more desperate in the manga, which makes him a bit of a loser as well. But also, it's just awkward in the movie. In both it is, but it's just more awkward in the movie because Oscar was just harassed by another fucking prick and had just had a moment with Fersen. Talk about not being able to read the fucking room, dude. Oh, and speaking on the weird guy that was harassing her, second is the weird aristocrat was just done better in this movie. I wasn't sure who he was in the manga, nor why we should believe that he's in love with Oscar other than his persistence, nor why we should dislike him. The movie just makes it so much more obvious. And at a later point of the film, before her engagement party, the best scene in the film, Andre and him have a confrontation, where rather than a person, Oscar is treated like an object that they are both trying to obtain. Now, on Oscar's side of this, not only is the reason for her being married off perceptually different, as it seems like the general wanted to pawn off his last daughter for wealth and recognition in the film, this being evident as the engagement is the first time we hear the general use she/her pronouns when referring to Oscar, and the Count can't stop bringing money up when he is with the general, whereas in the manga, the general does this as a last-ditch effort to keep her safe so she doesn't march with the guards and get herself killed. It's a shock at first, sure, but Oscar's own mother claims it is for her safety. Once again, movie Oscar is the object of trade, whereas you feel for Oscar's family in the manga as all they want to do is help their daughter stay safe and alive. Sure, the general is strict but cares for his daughter, unlike seemingly in the movie where he just seems to resent her because she was born a woman. But on top of that, the manga is gayer, and I feel robbed of Oscar fraternizing with multiple women at her engagement party, more than just one. Movie Oscar is often fighting a losing battle. In the manga, all the bridges she burns are with purposeful intent, whereas the movie feels more like a rebel without a cause, as we aren't given any reason to believe Oscar wants to fight for the people. She instead only insists on fighting for herself, and half the time, she can't even do that. The reason I think the rebellion is for her own honor at the engagement is so good is because she stands up for herself and breaks the engagement on her own standing. It's not so simple in the manga, where she has to try and convince the Count to break off the engagement, and it's weirdly touchy-feely. In the film, there is a fight with the general after the engagement, because he is still loyal to the crown, whereas she has suddenly rebelled, and it's here where Andre comes to save her, and all Oscar can do is sit and hold her hand in pain and suffer. When any event similar to this in the manga, it is a result of Oscar progressively moving away from the crown, and even then, the general is at most just disappointed in her, but can understand that she's not going to change her reasoning. So he resorts to trying to marry her off, which doesn't work, because she insists on marching with the guards, despite everyone else's begging. It is her duty as a citizen of France and of the people. So here's where we get the third major split of Andre's character, the condescension. Now, the points where Andre is condescending is the moments where Oscar's ego shows up to get the better of her. Like, Andre is the foil to her ego as a woman and as a figure of authority. To begin is Oscar's interactions with the guards. Their first interaction with her, she perceives that they've been undermining her authority as she is a woman, which is what they are doing. However, she believes this to be because they did not bring their swords with them. She gets frustrated and storms off to find Andre and complain that they are in fact doing this in spite of her. Andre then states that they didn't forget their swords, but rather sold them to feed their families. Because Andre is not nobility, he is depicted as being far more understanding of the world and of the situation of the people, whereas Oscar has her head stuck up her ass and is a bit of a ditz to the entire scenario, only focusing on herself and her goals over that of the revolution.
My men hid their swords today, just to torment me.
Did they? Or did they sell them to keep their families from starving?
After being assaulted, Oscar tells Andre to leave her alone, and he does. He goes to live with Bernard and Rosalie off screen. We only hear this in conversation that Oscar and Andre have after her engagement party. He then explains that they are going to take action for the revolution, this idea being implanted in Oscar's head by Andre. It's Andre's decision that this is happening. And the switch is flipped. Oscar is now a revolutionary. This could not be further from the truth. First of all, the guards, as priorly mentioned, Oscar does her most to defend guards, which garners respect from them. Sure, at first they are against her, and the whole scene of Oscar being frustrated about them not listening is present, but nowhere near as whiny because Oscar has a brain and tries to outwit them, while also respecting that they are people. She discovers that the men sold their swords to pay for food for their families from an important figure in the army, as the swords were found being smuggled and sold to revolutionaries. And after hearing them out, Oscar doesn't harshly punish them. She lets them off easily. And in this scenario, Andre is there, 100%, and is also pissed off when the guards don't listen to Oscar. They refer to him as being a lapdog of sorts. He doesn't talk down to Oscar about it. He just asks just as many questions as Oscar to keep up. Oscar in this movie is damselesque with a sudden rebellion, whereas manga Oscar is very blunt, boyish, and explores the sympathy she has for people of France. Whereas you can think of Andre's differences as being linked to his autonomy. Movie Andre is his own man. Manga Andre can't be without Oscar. Whether it's for his own sake or hers, we can't be too sure. What I can be sure of is that Andre is always with Oscar, and with his grandma being Oscar's nanny, it's ingrained into him to take care of her. In a way, reversing some of the gender roles that Oscar as a woman would be expected to fulfill. Then is the Bastilles. Oscar going into that fight knowing that they will be attacked. Knowing she might die, but it is her duty, and nothing is stopping her from going forward with it. Not even Andre. It is and always was Oscar's call, and Andre is right there with her. Always. Is she scared? Of course. But she has a duty that she must fulfill, and she'll be damned if she doesn't. Which leads me to the way the story ends and how Andre dies. Andre's death is very reflective of where the movie went wrong. Andre dies alone, pitifully, with Oscar wandering into a crowd of people calling his name. It's supposed to be a tragic love, and yet it truly symbolizes how this Oscar is fully reliant and her agency stems from Andre. She's not in uniform, and this is one of the only times her hair is down. Every other time we see Oscar in a similar state, it is when she is at her most vulnerable and intimate. And here she is, walking alone, scared and in a white button-up with her hair down, aimlessly looking for a dead Andre, having had no role in actually storming the Bastilles. So how do they die in the manga? Andre is similarly shot, but Oscar is right by his side. She insists on taking care of him and getting him water so he can recover, and when she gets back, reality sets in. He's gone. And in one last hurrah, one last push, as she feels his spirit within her, they go to storm the Bastilles. Oscar losing her life in the exact same way that Andre does. That chapter ending with their souls intertwined, ascending to a higher realm. They are equal, they are one, in life and in death. The Rose of Versailles personally deserved a better interpretation of the source material. But in translating the text to film and erasing half the context of the series by demoting Marie Antoinette from a main character to a side character, the filmmakers have created their own fanfiction of the Rose of Versailles, and to simply put it, I do not like the movie. If it wasn't already obvious with the back and forth points, I find the fact that they changed the characters so heavily really frustrating. They basically took the characters of the Rose of Versailles and put them into a period piece on the French Revolution. Because why is Oscar the damsel in her own story? And that is where I'm going to leave you guys for this review. Personally, I don't like this film. as compared to the source material. I highly recommend you read The Rose of Versailles, not necessarily watch this film. If you are a fan of The Rose of Versailles, do not watch this film at all. Because Mia on first watch was not happy with it. And me on second watch, having read the book, was not happy with it. I will leave you with that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video for the most part. I like doing deep dives into manga, so doing this was really fun, if not a little bit confusing. Thank you, Mia, for reading majority of the script and approving it for going out. You didn't get to read the Oscar and Andre part, so I'm sorry about that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.
It's time to go. You must go now. The spectacle is over, sir. It's time to go home.